powerful and lethal Onryo. Sadako Yamamura was the daughter of a famed seer from Izuoshima, Japan. Her mother left many questions unanswered. In her hometown, sailors disliked the way her mother would spend her days on the beach, her eyes fixed on the foaming waves of the sea. Some said, "Frolic in the brine, goblins be thine. If you keep playing in the water, the monster will come for you." 9 months later, Sadako was born. As a child, her immense powers seemed impossible to control and flared in anger. This became apparent when she was unable to control her rage during a public demonstration of her mother's powers. When a journalist called her mother a fraud, Sadako's powers surged and the journalist collapsed on the floor, struck dead. Then everything went wrong. Her mother passed away, and shortly after, Sadako was lured to an old, crumbling well. As she leaned over the rim, a long shadow fell over her. She turned, and a sudden jolt of pain hit her over the head, cracking it open. Her vision dimmed, and her mind swirled into the unconsciousness. She felt 2 hands pushing her over the rim. Pain exploded in her skull as she hit the cold ground. Grinding noise came from above, and the well darkened, all light obscured like a midday eclipse. Every inch of her body screamed in pain. Looking up, she saw the only way out. She dug her nails into the muddy ground and slowly crawled towards the cobbled wall. She gripped the stones to climb, but had neither the hold nor the strength. Each time she clawed up a few inches, her nails slid against the wet wall and she slipped down. Her fingers gushed with blood as the coarse cobblestone tore off her nails and lacerated the flesh underneath. And yet, she tried again and again. Decades later, the meadow became a resort, and a log cabin was built above the well. When a visitor rented the cabin, Sadako found an opportunity for revenge. She summoned all her Nensha powers and projected a terrible curse on a videotape that killed its viewers after 7 days. Her wrath was like the tides of a stormy sea, violent and unforgiving. As she plunged into a fury, a dark fog coiled at her feet. The sound of crashing waves echoed through the old stone well. Suddenly, a tidal surge came crashing down on the cabin's walls, wrecking its logs into a torrent of mud and filth. The black current flooded the well underneath and swallowed Sadako at once. When she opened her eyes, she stood on a desolate beach, facing a vast, stormy ocean. A thick, black fog caressed the water's surface. Sadako walked into a coming wave, slowly disappeared into the opaque fog. The Fold was founded on a private American island in the 1960s by a group of anonymous philanthropists. The goal was to establish a peaceful society free of dark thoughts and emotions, attracting the dismayed, disenchanted, and disillusioned from all over the country. This peace-loving community thrived over the years, and members freely followed the dictates of its charismatic leader, Otto Stamper, who taught his followers the secret of maintaining happiness through joy talk, meditation, and the endless reciting of good thinking mantras. But not all was bliss within the Fold, and Otto swiftly banished anyone who confessed to having dark thoughts or speaking dark words. Those he appointed as the guardians of the Fold were quick to root out malcontents, banishing anyone who thought or spoke against the almost perfect community he had established. Life was more or less a utopian dream on the island, until, that is, the darkness began to slowly leak through the cracks of their spiritual dam, and members began to mysteriously disappear. It wasn't long before fear closed its septic jaws on the island and refused to let go. The once happy community now gathered in a few homes chanting all the good thinking mantras in a desperate attempt to rid their lives of this formless creature that seemed to stalk them in the shadows and consume them in their sleep. Otto tried to quell his followers, telling them that they were malcontents among their ranks and that they alone had summoned the Druani to their garden of joy. As the fold bleated fear, Otto evoked desperate measures. Ottomarians were restricted to their homes to prevent the spread of rumours and dark talk, while sleep was forbidden to prevent anyone from releasing dark dreams into the world. Freedom and sleep would return just as soon as the Druani was no longer upon them. But when the Ottomarians continued to disappear, Otto assembled his followers near the beach, where he placed a screaming woman on a wooden stage. There, in the rain, Otto explained to his drenched, alienated, and sleep-deprived congregation that the woman was a journalist here to destroy everything they had created. As the Guardians held the trembling woman, she screamed that Otto wasn't the savior he claimed to be. He belonged to an ancient cult, an exclusive club of billionaires that took pleasure in corrupting and sacrificing people, towns, and even countries to an elder god. The journalist told them Otto hadn't banished anyone. He had tortured and sacrificed them, and that they would all be next. Without hesitation, Otto slit her throat before she could continue to spread lies. As she collapsed to her knees with her hands clasped around her neck, he told his confused and terrified herd that she was working with others within their ranks, and that they needed to find the imposters before the Druani came for them all. Otto's words shot over the congregation and reached into the murky recesses of their hearts and dredged up dark and fearful things. Years of suppressed emotions began to bubble up as a thick fog pushed through the restless legs and feet. Whispers began, and the whispers became panicked mantras, and the mantras became screams and curses as each member accused the next of mal-thinking and mal-speaking. Over the howling wind and pounding rain, the screams and curses grew louder and louder as everyone desperately tried to contain the darkness within. But the harder they tried, the quicker they ailed, and within moments, the dam burst to release a torrent of hell. Otto watched his once blissful and joyful herd suddenly erupt into violence unlike anything he had ever seen before. The fold bleated accusations and tore each other to bits and pieces with hands and teeth, and never once did they look up to see their kind and charismatic shepherd smiling down upon them with eyes that were cold, bleak, and without pity. When it was all over, Otto felt the creaking wooden stage shake as a murder of crows circled above. Suddenly, the ground rose and then sank into a thick, oozing black mud like molasses. Moments later, a formless mass squelched out of the mud and rose like a rearing horse to feed upon the writhing mass of butchered humanity. It was everywhere and nowhere at once as it slowly picked its way through the carnage, absorbing the darkness, savoring the misery, trailing terrible noises, shrieks, cries, whimpers, pops, cracks, feasting sounds, death sounds, dark sounds. Otto watched the creature as it slowly began to manifest into the very thing he had imagined, the very thing he'd made them all imagine. It slowly turned to look at Otto for a long, silent moment. Then the Druani trudged away through the thick, black sludge, disappearing into the shadows from which it had come. Albert Wesker was a high-ranking official in the Umbrella Corporation. While he made great strides with Umbrella, his ambition drove him to betray the corporation. Believing himself the best test subject, he exposed himself to the prototype virus. Now with superhuman strength, Wesker faked his death and went underground with a new plan. Expose the world to Ouroboros, a biological weapon that would eliminate the weak and leave only the strong. Wesker began to put his plan to action in Africa, but was confronted by members of the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance at a hangar stocked with missiles carrying Ouroboros. Determined to be at the vanguard of evolution, he once again made himself a test subject, exposing himself to Ouroboros. He began to evolve in ways he could have never imagined. But as he felt his cells change, a strange black fog seeped into the hangar and filled his vision. When the fog finally dissipated, he found himself in another world, surrounded by lesser beings that deserved to be put out of their misery. Tahos Kovacs didn't remember much about his childhood, but what he did remember he would chase his entire life. He remembered the cries and screams in the village. He remembered his mother forcing him to swallow a thick black fluid like medicine. He remembered collapsing to the hard floor, only to awaken in a mass grave, buried under a crush of bodies, with the sound of the village burning in his ears. He remembered pushing, pulling, and climbing to the top of the bloody mass, only to be seized by the death, destruction, and silence. The indifferent and impenetrable silence. A high-pitched whine suddenly sounded in his ears, and his skin began to prickle as he realized he was in the presence of something he couldn't possibly understand. And though he couldn't articulate what he was experiencing, he knew it wasn't pain, grief, or fear. It was something else, something closer to awe. As Tahos tried to make sense of the moment, he didn't notice the men who approached him from behind. He didn't even react when they carried him off to a horse-drawn buggy and locked him up in a small wooden cage with the other slaves. He just stared at the scene, mesmerized. And even as they rode away telling him he was headed for Italy, Tahos stared through the wooden cracks with his eyes wide open and a heart wanting to understand what could not be understood. From that day on, Tahos belonged to the Guardia Compagna, where he trained under Kadir Hakam, where he learned to wield weapons, forge armor, and recite a code of chivalry to obediently serve those who would employ his services. As the years passed, Tahos made a few friends amongst the hostile and competitive mercenaries, but his skill, strength, and smarts attracted a small following who believed his courage brought them luck in battle, and that one day he would help them earn their collective freedom. 3 of his followers pledged their undying allegiance to Tahos and came to be known as his Faithful 3, his pack. Alejandro Santiago apprenticed with the Guardia Compagna's armorer. Durkos Malachek showed an aptitude for stealth and silent kills. Sander Rolt matched Tahos in size and strength. His weapon of choice? A massive battle axe. As the Guardia Compagna carried out campaigns in faraway lands, Tahos dispatched countless enemies. Years passed, blood flowed, and yet all that killing still didn't bring Tahos closer to what he had experienced in his village. Nevertheless, for his bravery in battle, Tahos was granted knighthood and freedom. The Hungarian slave was now liberated, his brutality rewarded, though his heart still longed for something else, something he could not name or describe. Tired of taking orders from those he considered his inferiors, Tahos left the Guardia Compagna to strike out on his own. Their leader, however, refused to release his followers. Determined to raise enough gold to liberate his followers, Tarhos found employment with a wealthy Italian lord. Vittorio Toscana was the Duke of Portoscuro. He was also a scholar, a world traveller, and a collector of ancient knowledge that had been hidden by an unknown cabal of mystics. Tarhos joined Vittorio's latest expedition to find a fragment of a pillar from an ancient school lost to time, a stone Vittorio called the Lapis Paradisus, for he believed it held secrets to open a gateway into a perfect world beyond good and evil. The expedition searched Roman ruins in France and crossed the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, where the path led to the catacombs beneath the Portuguese city of Sintra. The citizens there considered the catacombs sacred. Tarhos would have to kill the villagers guarding the entrance to retrieve the stone. Not wanting to shed blood, Vittorio commanded Tarhos to find another way. But Tarhos, who had seen the most horrific acts committed under the guise of chivalry, refused to be dissuaded by the pretenses of honor. He waited for Vittorio to ride back to camp. Then, with an almighty roar, he pushed forward, cutting a path of blood and gore into the darkness until he had the stone in his grasp. Upon returning to the town of Portoscuro, Tarhos imprisoned Vittorio in his own dungeon, demanding to know the meaning behind the symbols etched in the stone. When Vittorio refused to talk, Tarhos brutally tortured his friends and relatives and made horrific displays of their bodies in the streets. But nothing he did shook Vittorio's resolve to keep the secrets of the stone from Tarhos. Enraged, Tarhos seized control of Vittorio's riches and raised a small army. Within months, Tarhos fearlessly marched upon the Guardia Campagna, decimating their barracks, freeing his followers, cutting down his enemies like twigs, and collecting their righteous heads for his growing displays of valor. In time, several lords in neighboring provinces believed Tarhos was the very embodiment of evil. They banded together to create a moral and virtuous army to purge evil from Portoscuro. Tarhos ignored their threats. He viewed the lords as cowardly and who cloaked their greed and ambition in laws, codes, and platitudes. Laws and codes and platitudes designed to hide from the very darkness Tarhos embraced and accepted without judgment. But, with his enemies on the march, Tarhos headed towards the dungeon to give Vittorio the death he deserved. He refused to afford him even the slightest hope of rescue. With dark intentions, he entered the small prison, wound his way into the bowels of the earth, and pushed through a torch-lit corridor. He hesitated for a moment, realizing he would never learn Vittorio's knowledge and secrets, but neither would anyone else. That was good enough for him. And so, he unlocked and kicked open the dungeon door. 2 quick strides brought him to an empty, rat-infested chamber. Tarhos stood still for a moment. Then a roar of indignation burst out of his lungs as the sounds of battle suddenly reverberated through the town. Instantly, he stumbled through the corridor, rushed up the twisting stairs, vaulted out of the moonlit doorway, and charged through pools of gleaming blood and viscera, smashing and shattering his way through the enemy. The moral and virtuous lords rained flaming boulders and tree trunks among the town, bursting through homes, crushing villagers like worms, pounding the ground and igniting stacks of hay and piles of lumber into massive tongues of fire. Amidst the carnage and chaos, the pack found Tarhos, and back to back they became a whirlwind of death. Some believed their courage gave them luck, others believed something otherworldly protected them. Whatever it was, they alone felled dozens of warriors as easily as stomping and crushing beetles. And as they butchered the enemy, Tarhos didn't notice the strange fog rising from the fallen corpses and clattering armor until he couldn't see 2 inches in front of him, in any direction. Tarhos stumbled forward, groping in the thick fog like the dark fluid his mother forced down his throat all those years ago. His coordination and sense of direction was confused as he called out for his pack. How long he stumbled in the almost perfect darkness he didn't know, but suddenly the fog dissipated to reveal a phantasmal wasteland of rotting bodies and burning villages and great crumbling towers leaning drunkenly on the horizon. He stared in awe. A familiar high-pitched whine sounded in his ears, and his skin began to prickle. He stood transfixed, realizing by some incredible chance his heart had found exactly what it had been searching for all his life. He didn't need Vittoria. He didn't need the stone. He had found his paradise. He had found the beauty and the horror. He had found the sublime.